benefit from that. So my story, and I know this particularly from listening to my family members, is when they came here from Korea in the 70s, they didn't have a lot of money. They didn't have equity, but they all opened up businesses eventually, right? I mean, and, they all started off working, like my dad, for example, worked in a GMC factory when he first came, but eventually we opened up a liquor store. My grandparents opened up liquor stores. So the question for me was how did you get a business loan when you had no equity and you didn't have a lot of money? When I asked my mom a few years ago, and I really didn't even think about asking her, and she said, well, we just said that we would pay it back. And the banks trusted us because they know that we work harder. And to me, I thought, okay, so that is the white supremacy, right? The fact that these people who came here from another country, who don't have a lot of history, don't have a lot of equity in this land, you gave them money on the promise that they would pay it back. That's really essentially what it is. Of course, they had to sign a loan contract, but let's just say it is a promise.
Okay, so y'all just heard that video right there, and this was actually sent to me, and shout out to the person that did send it. And this person right here, whose name is Dr. Rita Suh, or Suh, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but I think it's Suh, basically said the quiet part out loud. And this is something that I've speculated, many people quite honestly have speculated when it comes to Asian Americans, and not just them, but a lot of other groups of people who come from other places and come over here and get planted in certain areas and certain locations, and we know what locations those are, and end up building a whole economy for themselves, and then are under the guise of, oh, we've worked hard and all this type of stuff right here, and then the masses grasp onto that and say how hard they work and whatnot. And I'm sitting here saying to myself, no, they did not work as hard as people think they did. Many of them got a lot of set aside, a lot of stuff that was supposed to be meant for us, but they give it to other people. And then that's why you get this thing of, oh, Black Americans are lazy. A lot of that comes from that. It's all part of one big circular game, and one that we are unfortunately losing, but not at any fault of our own. That's literally the default setting. It's basically like a cheat code where it's supposed to be meant for us to lose, where we can't even compete even on an equal playing field. That's why I always keep saying equality is more of a myth than anything. So you had this woman right here that pretty much broke all of that down. Now, of course, this is a breakdown video, so I'm gonna go back and break down what she said, even though, again, like my other breakdown videos, it's pretty easy to catch the first time, but some people may not have caught it, so we're gonna go and play it back.
So my story, and I know this particularly from listening to my family members, is when they came here from Korea in the 70s, they didn't have a lot of money. They didn't have equity, but they all opened up businesses eventually, right? I mean, and, they all started off working, like my dad, for example, worked in a GMC factory when he first came, but eventually we opened up a liquor store.
So you heard that right there. She said her family came over from Korea in the 70s. And they basically was able to open up a lot of these different businesses, not right away. Of course, she said they had to end up working in order to make ends meet before they started opening up the liquor store. Now, she could have easily just left it right there and said they worked and worked and worked and then pulled the money together in order to open up these liquor stores. But she didn't say that. She said they worked. Her dad worked at a factory and was making money to get by, but then all of a sudden they just came across this big loan out of nowhere for them to open up these liquor stores. And pay attention to what kind of business they own or opened up. A liquor store. You can pretty much guarantee where those liquor stores were placed at. You can pretty much guess. I mean, if you look around any Black community, you're probably going to find at least five liquor stores within a mile radius. I can almost guarantee it. I know this because I live in a majority Black area, and you can find literally a liquor store that's probably within walking distance.
My grandparents opened up liquor stores. So the question for me was, how did you get a business loan when you had no equity and you didn't have a lot of money?
She was asking those questions early on. She knew something was kind of iffy then. She was like, y'all came over with no equity, really no kind of personal economy to open up these liquor stores, especially back in the 70s. You know, back then, the economy was way different. Money worked a whole lot different compared to today. So she's wondering, how is it that you came from over there and had nothing over there to even open up a brick and mortar, no matter how big or small it was, but you come over here and all of a sudden you get this loan to open up a store that you wouldn't even dream of, or probably even possibly be able to do back in your homeland, but you was able to do it here. So she's asking no questions. She figured out early on, or was starting to ask questions early on, because it was something that just kind of struck her as odd.
A few years ago, and I really didn't even think about asking her. And she said, well, we just said that we would pay it back. And the banks trusted us because they know that we work harder.
Now, peep that. Now, that goes back to that part about the we work harder part. She says that, like, when she went to her mom and, you know, was talking about the banks, they said the banks gave them the money because they trusted they would pay it back because they work harder. Now, I don't know if that was her mother saying that we work harder or the banks telling her mother that they work harder. I'm willing to bet it's probably the banks that told her that. And we all know who owns the banks. So they gave them that money because they said that they work harder. To be honest, they basically fed them a lie to kind of boost their ego of them working harder. But really, it was to undermine black people. Because again, notice where they put all these liquor stores, these dry cleaners, and all these carryouts. They put them mainly in black communities. That way, black people cannot get a chance to get in on that economy. And don't forget, like the nail shops, the hair stores, and all of that. Any type of economy that black people possibly could get in, especially when it comes to hair, especially for black women, and even the nail industry for black women, it gets cornered. If y'all remember, there was a story that I was telling you about. It was about a black woman. I forgot what state it was in, who was trying to open up a business somewhere in like the upper, like the Midwest somewhere. It could be wrong. If I can find the screenshot of the article I posted in here, where she was trying to open up a nail store, but because it was within a certain mile radius of an already Asian owned store, they did not allow her to open it because of quote unquote competition. At least that's what they say. But what she ended up doing was like saying, fine, I'm going to pack my stuff up and I'm going to go over to your turf. This woman went all the way to Asia. I want to say Japan. And she opened up the store that she was going to open up here in the States over there. And now her business over there, at least the last time I looked, was thriving. She had to actually leave her home just to open up her business because they would not allow her to do it because they cornered the market. And that was very intentional. And that's really what they do here. So don't fall for the, black people don't want to do it. It's because they cornered the market intentionally to shut black people out. Again, it's an undermining thing. It's like literally modern day redlining.
Okay, so that is the white supremacy, right? The fact that these people who came here from another country, who don't have a lot of history, don't have a lot of equity in this land, you gave them money on the promise that they would pay it back. That's really essentially what it is. Of course, they had to sign a loan contract, but let's just say it is a promise.
So there it is. She said they gave them the money just because they have a promise of a loan that they would actually pay it back, not because of the fluff saying, oh, they work harder. That was just to say, oh, we'll say that you work harder. We know you really don't, because if you did, why didn't you do what you did over there? Why aren't you doing it over here? But we're not going to tell you what our real meaning is to why we're giving you this money. Because if we told you why that was, then you probably, if you had any morals about yourself, you wouldn't take it. So they tell them these lies. Oh, you are very hardworking. And then on top of that, they give them the title of model minority. So when you couple all of that together, it's all working like one well-oiled machine that works in their favor and against us. But I'm glad that this woman actually came out and actually said what many of us had already assumed to be true. But it's one thing when it comes from us, because again, we're not in their shoes, and people won't really believe us like that. But then it's another when it comes from a person who's of that lineage, of that background, who actually knows firsthand what was going on. And again, this woman realized early on. She was asking questions early on because she was confused. How is it that we came from poverty over here to quote unquote get the American dream, and then all of a sudden this big loan drops into our lap out of nowhere? Like, it's almost like the skies opened up and a pot of gold just dropped right from the sky onto the ground, and it just happened to land in our front yard. So yeah, it's like I said, it's all circular. It's all working like a machine. And that's how many of these other groups do too. So black people out there, don't fall for that narrative when other groups say, oh, we just work harder, black Americans are lazy. That's not the case. That's not true. Black Americans work hard, if not harder, than most of these other groups. But because we get shut out from these industries and they get put in their good place there where we should be, then that's when they come up with the narrative that we're lazy. And that's not the case. If y'all remember, it was a story that I talked about that happened in my neck of the woods, well, in DC, in Ward 8. Ward 8 is predominantly black, and it's 8 wards in DC, and Ward 8 is the blackest one. There was some construction workers, or they put out like a call to get some construction workers, but they told them to have the people who live within Ward 8 to get first dibs at those construction jobs before they started to reach out. They put it out there and they broke the contract and ended up getting Mexicans from Maryland and Virginia, which means they had to travel further to get to the construction site. And black people got up in arms about it, and rightfully so, and went down to that site and protested. It was like, no, y'all said right here in writing that y'all was going to hire from within Ward 8 to have us there, but you hired a whole bunch of Mexicans. They literally broke that contract that was in writing, which in my opinion is illegal, and gave these jobs to a bunch of Mexicans because, again, quote unquote, they work harder. So you would rather have people who don't even live in the ward where the construction site is at, and have them come from 2 neighboring states to come down there and do that work. The black people came down there and raised hell, and all those Mexicans walked off the job. Now, that was the last time I really heard about that. I don't know what came of that, but that was the last thing I remember coming from them. That happened a couple years ago. This was actually pre-pandemic. I do remember that. I want to say it may have happened in 2019, maybe 2018 at the furthest. And I also remember the reception. You had a lot of people that try to clown or try to come at black people saying how disrespectful you are. I was like, no, how disrespectful they are for breaking that contract when it was supposed to be for black people. So I actually give kudos to black people for standing on their square and calling that crap out. And they were wrong for going against what they put in that contract. It was legally binding, like it was signed and everything. It wasn't a verbal agreement. It was a typed up, signed, sealed, and delivered document that they broke. So I'm glad black people actually stood their ground and actually called it out and actually did something about it. But yeah, to really wrap this up, I'm glad this woman actually said something. Again, she said the quiet part out loud. She would be considered off code by certain standards. But like I said, she is only a representative of herself for this one, as not as the collective, because a lot of the collective will tell you that, you know, that she's lying and all this, that, and the third. And also other groups of people, whether they're south of the Bordarians, Native Americans, any of these other foreign groups who get these set-asides that were supposed to be for us, they fall into the same exact category as she does, well, her lineage does. And going back to the part, and I don't know if I remember if I said it in the beginning or not, going back to the part where she was saying about them working harder, again, working harder than who? I will say that she didn't say working like harder than who. We can pretty much gauge it, but I wish she would have said, when she said working harder, when the banks had told them about that loan they got, open up them liquor stores, working harder than who exactly? We can pretty much assume which group of people she's talking about when she said working harder than, or who they are hard workers or working harder than. We know that they're talking about black people. We know this. Again, the undermining of us to prop everyone else up. And now look at how many of them are, what they're going through right now with the overturning of affirmative action. It makes you really question about how much hard work is actually there. And again, I did a whole live stream a little while ago where I was, well, not a live stream, it was a video when I was calling out Dinesh D'Souza, where he was breaking down like the stats and test scores of a lot of people in India or in Asia, and how many of them were using bootleg tests to pass, quote unquote, or they were using recycled tests in order to pass again, quote unquote, or cheating to get into these schools. So it's like, what hard work are you exactly talking about? If anything, I would think that, or I can almost say that black people, specifically black Americans, are some of the most merit-based people that you can ever come in contact with. Is there cheaters in every group? Of course there are. But to sit up there and try to make it seem like this particular group is smarter than the other one just because of their lineage, that is far from the truth.